People called me when I played baseball. I played baseball at New York University, and nobody liked the name of Harold.
Well, it's not a real baseball
Right.
name, so
Right.
no, that's great. Okay.
We're recording.
All right, great. So, Dr. Baumgarten, we'd like you to give us your name again, please, and spell your
Right.
last name.
Right. I'm Dr. Harold Baumgarten, Baumgarten.
Where were you when the war started? Where were you? Pearl Harbor.
On Pearl Harbor Day, I was playing football. It was a Sunday, and it was very cold in George Washington High School Stadium in New York. And I had one of my biggest runs. I ran a kickback back about 54 yards.
Well, that's pretty good.
And I was playing with older guys, and they all went down and enlisted that day. They went down to...
So were you pretty sure your life was going to change?
Oh, I knew it was going to change, because I was anxious to get into the service. But I was only, Pearl Harbor, I was 16.
Well, talk to us then about how you did eventually wind up in the service.
Well, I tried to enlist when I was 17 in the Air Corps, and they wouldn't give me flying duty because I couldn't bring two lines together. So they wanted to give me ground duty, and I refused it. I stayed at college, and I finished up my second year of pre-med, and I got the draft notice. My professors were on the draft board, and they wanted to get an exemption from me, but I was anxious to get in the service. So I got drafted June 26, 1943, and I reported for duty on July 10th, 1943 at Camp Upton, New York, which was the camp that Irving Berlin wrote his song, "Oh, I Hate to Get Up in the Morning." I was there about 3 days, shipped to Camp Croft, South Carolina for 17 weeks of infantry training. And afterwards, I was kept around with many of the fellas that joined the 29th Division for what they called ASTP training. They had to sign waivers to OCS, and they kept us there to send us to colleges. They were going to send me to Clemson University, and they were going to finish up the pre-med and make a doctor of me. But they became short of troops in Europe, and they canceled the program. And almost a whole shipload of us on the Ile-de-France shipped overseas and shipped to the 29th Division.
What was the trip across from the U.S. over to England? What was that?
Well, one of my few times I got seasick. And the reason I got seasick, we were trying to outrace any submarines. So they zigzagged across the Atlantic Ocean. And we were way down in the hold, and the food was terrible, and I got seasick. One of the few times. I didn't even get seasick in combat. So we got over to Greenock, Scotland, and which was near Glasgow, put us on a troop train. We went down, and ultimately I was taken to Plymouth, England. Plymouth, England, Crown Heights, was the headquarters of the 116th Regiment of the 29th Division. And we were addressed by Colonel Charles Canham, who was a West Pointer. And he told us 2 out of 3 of you aren't coming back because we're going to lead the invasion of France. We were told that. And then we were assigned to various companies. Well, I was assigned to Company A, 116th Infantry, which had a huge nucleus of Virginia people. And as you can hear my accent, they didn't understand me, and I didn't understand them at first. But we got to know each other. And we worked in boat teams. When I got over there, January 44, they were starting amphibious training. So everything reverted not to companies, but to boat teams. So we slept, ate, and lived in boat teams. 29 men, 1 officer to a boat team. You were so familiar with your boat team, we practiced with wooden mock-up little assault boats, and we ran off a certain way. We went out to the flanks, and anybody that had a At first I had a Browning automatic rifle, and we were so good at working as a team that I could fire between people's legs. We used live ammunition all the time. It turned out something else. I became a crack shot for some reason. I had only fired a BB gun outside of the ROTC, where I was an expert rifleman. When Camp Croft, I got almost a perfect score from with the M1 rifle. So when I joined the Company A, they already had a sniper, so they didn't use me as a sniper. He was the guy with the 03 rifle with the telescopic sight. So, but that being a crack shot helped out in combat.
Give us an idea of the training. How tough was it? Whether or not you guys felt you were ready to go?
The training for the 29th Division, 116th especially, was very rough. We had marches almost every other week of 20 miles or more across the countryside. We trained on the moors. We slept out on the moors, which a Jeep could disappear there because it was very wet and damp. We slept out in that. So we were toughened. We had to take what was known as the expert infantry badge test, and where we had to do so many push-ups. You had to do, I think it was 30 push-ups and so many pull-ups, and you had to run with a man on your back 75 yards, and which was nothing for me because I was an athlete. I played for the New York University baseball team. I played football for money when I was 16. I played soccer in high school, and I did boxing even at Camp Croft. So I was an all-around athlete. I was on the track team at New York University. I weighed 185 pounds plus, and I was 5'10" at the time. Now I'm 140. I'm shrinking.
I wish I could get you back down to somewhere around where I was at 18. But so the training then was pretty intense.
Training was very intense, especially the amphibious training. They sent us to amphibious training school in North Wales. We trained with the British Navy, and we still did these mock-up things on the sand. We fired our weapons on sand on a beach called Woolacombe Beach. And in fact, we made a landing there. That was the first official landing that I made with the 29th Division, with the British Navy bringing us in. All those landings, though, in training were on daylight, sun shining, and they would drive the boats up on the beach, and we'd attack pillboxes on the beach itself. And when I tell you about combat later, you'll know what the difference was. So we had excellent training. We practiced going up rope ladders like 5 stories high to get used to going up the side of a ship and coming down. But when they let us go up the rope ladders, I said, well, when do I go down the rope ladder? They said, you don't. And I looked back on the back of the superstructure. It was pipes like 10 feet apart, metal pipes. So we had to get down with metal cleats in our shoes and over 100 pounds of equipment and your rifle and your ammunition. And you had to slide down those pipes. And if you didn't, you got splattered on the sand of Woolacombe, which was the ATC, Amphibious Training Center. And the Rangers trained with us. They were the Company C of the 2nd Ranger Battalion, the ones supposedly seen in Saving Private Ryan. And they were attached to the 116th Regiment. So I'd say the training was excellent. We were ready to go. Now the fellas that were there, I was a replacement. The fellas that were there were older. The average age turned out to be 24, but there were a lot of guys in their 30s, and they had been over there since October 42, and they were getting tired of waiting to go into combat, get it over with so we can go home to our families. Some of them had children that they had never seen. So they were anxious to fight.
Okay.
And they were good. 29th was good.
Now, before you loaded on the ships to get ready for the invasion, they locked you down in camps.
In Sausages. We were put in Camp D1, and it was just the 1st Battalion in D1. So Company A was in this corner, Company B was in front of them, Company D was over there, and Company C was over there. And we had a manor house in that Sausage, which General Eubenor, the 1st Division, came to talk to us. We were in there from about I'd say May 17th, till we got ready to go to the boats. And we were about 10 miles north of Dorchester, England, in the center of the country almost. General Eubenor said, your regiment is going to be under my command for 24 hours. So I'm going to command my 16th Regiment, the 1st, and your 116th for 24 hours. I don't know how many people knew that, because we wore our insignias on the helmet, on the arm, and if General Gerhardt had his way, we wear it on our underwear. So we were very proud of our insignia. Now, in that camp, we got new equipment. Well, we got new equipment before we got there. We got a special combat jacket with the packs built into it. We had a special gas mask issued, little black rubber thing that went under your neck. We had a special life preserver, which went under your arms and over the gas mask. They don't show that in the D-Day Museum. They show it worn around the waist, which was not right. Special gas mask for D-Day, a special barf bags, seasick pills, which were later became known as Dramamine. We had special lubricants for our weapons, which was a white cream, which the scientists got hold of French sand, and they said this will not foul your weapons up. And pliaform bags to cover the weapons. I used a rubber condom, which worked very well. We had a special first aid kit given to us for D-Day. We were the first troops allowed to carry our own morphine. So I had 1 grain of morphine in my first aid kit, which I wore around here, around my right thigh, which had a little red teeth thing on the top, which you press down. It ruptured the opening of a little hypodermic needle. In combat, I was able to inject myself, and it saved a lot of lives. They don't use it anymore. Only the medics get it. But it saved a lot, because OxyContin is the leading street drug in the United States today, abused drug, and that's morphine. So it saved a lot of lives because it prevented death from shock. So I used little doses of it in myself. The equipment, well, I myself had my head shaved in Blanchford. That's the camp before the Sausage. And I had, that was for hand-to-hand combat. I had my 10-inch bayonet razor sharp. I sharpened it in the Sausage D1 camp. So both sides were razor sharp, and it was balanced for throwing. My shoes had metal cleats to use as a weapon. Each one of us were allowed to choose our own ammunition. I chose 3 bandoliers of armor-piercing ammunition, mostly. I put a few traces in case I wanted to, that was red-tipped ammunition, in case I wanted to burn somebody out of a farmhouse. So I thought of all this in advance. I myself carried 25-foot of twine in between my helmet liner and my helmet, in case I had somebody that I had to capture and I wanted to tie him up. I had that. So I was thinking of all that. I carried a little bar of soap in my right back pocket, because knowing in medicine, if you get a wound, you try to wash your wound with soap and water. Back here, each of us were given a half-pound block of TNT. And this was to help blow foxholes. I made one mistake. I took my fuse and my fuse lighter, my blasting cap, and I put it in the netting of my helmet on this side. Why I did it, nowadays I know if I got shot there, it would blow my head off. But all the other guys were doing it. I followed suit. All that equipment weighed in excess of 100 pounds. Now keep in mind, I weighed 185 pounds plus, and 5'10". The average guy only weighed 145 pounds, and he was 5'7". That means some of them were 5'4". Some of them were carrying their own weight on D-Day. You want me to continue?
Oh, you're doing great.
All right, we're in the sausage. All we did is relax in the sausage, plus get our equipment ready, plus in the Company A tent, headquarters tent, and we were issued 2 100-franc notes, invasion money, by Company A, and that was in my wallet. We had a mock-up of the beach, plus we had airplane pictures of the obstacles on our beach. So we had a mock-up of Vierville-sur-Mer, Dog Green Sector. And when we looked at it, it sort of sent chills through your spine because the pillboxes were not on the beach. They were 25 feet up above the beach. There were 2 on this side, on the left side, 1 on the right side. They were all still there. I was there 2 weeks ago. They're still there. I can tell you what weapons were in there on D-Day, if you want to know.
Sure, go ahead.
75 millimeter cannon and the one furthest to the left, firing east on Omaha Beach. The one adjacent to it had a 50 millimeter gun on a swivel, and they could fire both east and west, covering the whole beach. The one on the right, which nowadays looks like a big eye staring out at you, was camouflaged as a seaside cottage on D-Day. Not many people know that unless they were there. The Rangers knocked off the camouflage. They fired an MG-42 machine gun crosswise on the beach. So they had everything zeroed in. 30 feet of, they had a 25-foot seawall going the entire length of that Dog Green Sector, extending into Charlie's sector, which was to our right. It was tailed away from you at a 45-degree angle, and it was covered with loose shale rocks. That was the only cover you had on D-Day. You had to reach that wall, 25 foot. The top of that wall was covered with barbed wire and mines. 30 feet above the wall, on the face of the 150-foot bluff that loomed up from that seawall, there were zigzag trenches cut. On D-Day, they had 3 machine guns in there. They had riflemen, some with telescopic sights. Now, the bad thing about their telescopic sights was not only because they could pick you off, but they could shoot at the mines on the obstacles on the beach if you were near them and blow you up with it. They could throw hand grenades down on the beach below, onto that wall. They had Tobruk's on that bluff, which were cement emplacements from which they could fire 105 millimeter mortar shells at the beach. And I'll tell you later how they use that 105 millimeter mortar. So they had tremendous defenses, and they had their artillery 3 miles south of Vierville. They were dug in cement emplacements. There were at least 5 88 millimeter guns, all pre-zeroed in on every square inch of Dog Green Sector. And just to make things more accurate, they had a forward observer in the steeple of the church in Vierville, which later on that day, we had to blow the steeple off to get rid of him. And in the zigzag trenches on the face of the bluff, they had a forward observer, a telephone, could call back any directions that they wanted the artillery to come in on. They had a road leading up into the town of Vierville, which went 600 yards from left to right, straight up. It was called D1 by the Allied command. It was of great strategic value because how would you get men and supplies up from the beach? Now, if you remember Saving Private Ryan, the mythical character played by Tom Hanks, Captain Miller, when he got to the so-called wall, they filmed it in Ireland, so there was no wall. But when he got to the wall, he was yelling and trying to communicate out on a radio that D1 is not open. Well, D1 was not open for a good reason, and I saw the reason because I took cover on that wall right next to D1. They had two parallel walls, like this, not like this, like this, 8.5 feet high, cement reinforced steel, 6 feet thick at their base. That was blocking that entrance from the beach to D1. In front of it was a tank trap, barbed wire, and mines. Now, if you remember the picture, you might be too young for the picture, The Longest Day. Robert Mitchum played Brigadier General Normandy Coda. He spent the entire last scenes of the picture trying to blow those walls. This was false. Infantry is not stopped by walls because we went up the bluff. But Colonel Ploga of the 29th Engineers blew those walls with 10 cases of TNT at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. He later became General Ploga.
By the way, I am old enough to know all of
Oh, okay. Now, where should we go from here?
Well, let's talk about.
Go to the. Should we mention the obstacles on the beach?
Well, let's go back to the camp and
Okay.
take us through loading
Okay.
up on the boats and what that was like.
Okay. They took us into the town of Weymouth. We marched down a boardwalk, much like in this town here, and the people all knew what was going on by the type of equipment we were carrying. You know, Bangalore torpedoes, and they can see by the armament, the flamethrowers, and we were dressed for combat and wearing all the bandoliers and all giving us the V for Victory sign. They put us on little salt boats, took us out to the same ship that we did our 2 other maneuvers on in England, on Slapton Sands Beach. It was the Empire Javelin, and 1st Battalion was on that ship. And we made 2 maneuvers in England in the beginning of, end of April and the beginning of May. They were called Fox 1 and Fox 2. And, but again, we landed on Slapton Sands Beach. The British Navy guys drove us way up on the sand. We landed almost dry. We attacked pillboxes on the beach itself. It was a different ball game. And it was a nice balmy sea. We went down our rope ladders and so forth. So anyway, we boarded the ship, and they kept stalling in the harbor because the weather was not good. And finally, you know the story, General Eisenhower said, go, so that we pulled out of the harbor on the night of the 5th, like 5 o'clock in the evening. And we left the harbor with our barrage balloons above us, so forth, and we anchored 11 miles off the coast of Normandy. The weather was still horrible, but they said go. The story was different in combat because we couldn't go down rope ladders because of the weather. We had lowered over the side by davits. So we had to climb over the railings, and we got into our boats, everybody wishing the other guy good luck, and we were lowered over the sides. When the boats hit the water, the waves were 20 feet high. So the little boats, which were LCAs, they rode lower in the water than the LCVPs, like the one they have in the D-Day Museum, which they say won the war. Well, we didn't land in the Higgins boat. Don't tell my friend Marty Moore. But anyway, we landed in LCA's, London-Croft Assault. And when the boats hit the water, they were thrown around like matchsticks. The boats filled up immediately with water. Every man was soaked with the icy cold English Channel water. We had to stand up the entire time. in close quarters. There was no seats, no coverings first. And we were going to go, we left the mothership at 3:30 in the morning. We had to stand up for 3 hours with the water up to almost up to our knees. We had to bail out with our helmets or we would sink. And there was vomiters in the water because some of the guys, luckily I was not seasick, but a lot of them were seasick, and some of them sat down in the water. They were so weak and sick, and I felt sorry for them. But anyway, we had 24 boats on their way for a rendezvous on Dog Green Sector, with its the most heavily fortified section of Omaha Beach. Plus, General Rommel put 4 rows of diabolical obstacles, all mined and barbed wired, and only visible at low tide. So the invasion had to take place at 6:30 a.m., which was low tide. So we had a 3-hour ride on these boats. Each boat was an army in itself, well armed. So we had good firepower to combat the firepower of the Germans. Hitler took his usual sleeping pill that night, fortunately. Didn't wake up till about 2 in the afternoon. General Rommel said no idiot would attack in this weather. And he went back to Germany for his wife's birthday, which was June 6th. What else did we have in firepower? We were assigned the battleship Texas. And the battleship Texas was going to open up on Dog Green Sector with its 16-inch guns at 5:55 to 6:25, a period of a half hour. Unfortunate, there were many unfortunate things. I didn't mention some of the unfortunate things. Eisenhower didn't know what troops were defending the beach because the pigeons that the French underground were going to send him the information with, the 2 pigeons were shot down by a German with a shotgun in the early part of May '44. So he didn't know that they had put in, they had 250 elderly men of the 716th Wehrmacht Division. They were supposed to surrender rapidly, but Eisenhower didn't know that they put 200 young, well-equipped, well-disciplined men of the 352nd Grenadier Division in. And so we had 450 defending the bluffs at Vierville, which Eisenhower didn't know about. Now, the battleship Texas, that was great. If they had hit their target, we'd be in good shape. But their shells went over the beach. That was another unfortunate thing. There was a whole series of unfortunates that took place. That's why the battle for Dog Green Beach was called the Suicide Wave by William Giroux of the Times-Dispatch of Richmond. Anyway, they meant well. The Navy also had an LCI barge fitted out with 1,000 rockets. They were going to fire 4,000 5-inch rockets at Dog Green Sector right before the landing. Unfortunately, most of them, the range was off. Most of them landed harmlessly in the water. So that was 2 unfortunates there. Now, I want you to keep in mind of something else. I don't know if you know anything about the Pacific War with the Marines landing on Iwo Jima, Saipan. The Navy bombarded those beaches for 3 days, 2 to 3 days. The battleship Texas and its squadron were only going to shell that beach for a half hour. The reason for that was the element of surprise. The Germans had 55 divisions, and we were landing with elements of 2 divisions on Omaha Beach. They could have thrown us into the English Channel very easily, especially if Hitler didn't take his sleeping pill. But anyway, what else did we have? We had 16 dual-drive amphibious tanks, Sherman tanks, that were going to come in on Dog Green Sector. And they had rubberized canvas sides, and they were going to, like they did in training, they were going to drop those rubberized sides when they floated in by boat, and they got on the beach, dropped their aprons, and the Germans would be faced with 16 75 millimeter cannons and machine guns at point blank range. And they were going to support us, lead us off the beach. Unfortunately, 14 of the tanks drowned that were supposed to come in on Dog Green. Only 2 tanks reached the beach before I landed, and one was immediately destroyed by German artillery. Another unfortunate thing. The Navy was going to do one more thing. They were sending in what was the future frogmen, the Navy battalion brigade engineers. And they were supposed to blow 2 paths through the obstacles. There were 4 rows of obstacles. Unfortunately, they got wounded and killed, so they only were partially successful. We could go in between whatever they blew. One other unfortunate. The Army Air Corps, as it was called, were going to drop 12,000 tons of bombs on Omaha Beach. Sounds great, doesn't it? Hiroshima had that kind of power, 12,000 tons. They promised us man-made foxholes when we got there. The bombardier had all this cloud cover. He was afraid to hit us coming in. So he delayed his drop for 3 seconds. 1001, 1002, 1003, dropped his bombs, and they landed 7 miles south of Vierville. They killed some Norman cows. So it was a series of unfortunate things. The last unfortunate was on Dog Green Sector. The beach was too narrow to land an entire battalion abreast of each other. So we were going to come in sequence. We couldn't even land 2 companies abreast of each other. So we were going to come in with our 24 boats in sequence, A, B, D, and C. Well, D got lost in the darkness and the rough seas. They landed 200 yards to the east. C got completely lost. They landed in the 1st Infantry Division sector, which was miles to the east. So only 2 companies were coming in on Dog Green. Instead of 720 men to oppose the 450 on the bluff, we were coming in. 3 boats of Company A drowned. 29 men in 1 boat were salvaged. The radio man died. They took them back to England. They didn't get back to June 9th. 2 of the boats of Company B strayed. 1 way to the west, 1 way to the east. So 7 boats were coming in at each hour to attack Dog Green Sector. That's 210 men. So now I'd like to tell you what happened when my little boat pulled up. Are we ready for that? Okay.
How much time we got on this one?
We have 25 minutes remaining. We're 35 minutes in.
Okay. I'm going to go get you some water.
Okay.
You need it. So
Okay.
I'll be right back. So the next thing I'd like you to just talk about is you're in the landing craft, you're starting in.
Right.
I'd like you to kind of describe the naval bombardment and the Air Corps and what
Well,
you guys think. Did you think there were any Germans left? Or?
Well, the only thing we could see was pitch black, except on the horizon was an orangey red glow, which was France. You know, the Air Corps had been bombing inland. So we thought we had it made because they told us what was going to take place. The Navy, the Air Corps, the tanks. So we thought we had it made. Now, in the boat itself, the guys were seasick, some of them, especially in my boat off to the right front. The couple guys were sitting in the bottom. Everybody was anxious to get off that boat and fight. You know, we knew what our objective was. Our objective was to hit that beach, take Vierville, turn right, and go west, and get to those ranges that went up Pontahawk, because they were only lightly armed and very little ammunition, because they had to climb up with ropes. So that was our job, to get down to them and rescue them. So everybody was anxious to get in. We didn't think we were going to make it because the boat was sinking. And it was due to the rough seas. And the British ships rode a little lower in the water due to some armor plate on the sides. So they took on more water than the LCVPs. And the bilge pumps couldn't control it. Now we looked up at the sky, we saw the sky was black with our airplanes. And much of the time we yelled, give them hell because we don't think we're going to make it. And we didn't think we were going to make it. We passed the battleship Texas, was on our port side. And we saw them open up with their firing. Well, we thought we had it made. And we knew we had superior air power. So the Navy did a great job later on in the day. One of them saved my life the next day, so the ships. But D-Day was unfortunate.
Okay.
So when my little boat approached Dog Green Sector, the first thing that happened was the boat on our port side blew up. We were showered with wood, metal, and body parts from about 15 feet up. And of course, blood. When our ramp went down, the British sailors, they were kids. He was 17 years old. He wanted to get out of there. So they dropped us in neck-deep water. Now, I was 5'10". Neck-deep for me was okay. These fellas that were 5'2", 5'3", 5'4", they were ready to drown, especially with that heavy equipment. The life preserver was worthless. There's one downstairs on view. So anyway, they dropped our ramp. It was a signal for every machine gun on that beach to open up on our exit to that boat. Lieutenant Harold Donaldson of Texas, and I was landing with strangers because I was only with these guys 2 weeks, but I knew their lieutenant's name. I just visited his grave 2 weeks ago. He was machine gunned right away, never got out of the boat. And a few of the people around him were machine gunned, like they showed in Saving Private Ryan. Now, the fellow in front of me was Clarius Riggs of Tennessee, and he was anxious to get off that boat to kill Germans. He was machine gunned on the ramp. I dove in behind him, and only my helmet was creased by a bullet. And there I was standing in bloody, neck-deep water, my rifle over my head. But I must tell you one other thing. They issued these combat jackets. The Army never used these combat jackets again because they were difficult to get off and the fellows drowned with them on. It pulled them down. I didn't wear it because my best buddy in the boat that I knew for 2 weeks, he made a watch band for me that's in the D-Day Museum, and his name is on the plaque that they have where my watch is. Robert Garbett Jr. of Newport News, Virginia. And he was an old man. He was 25 years old. And I was only 19. He said, Hal, don't wear that jacket. It's liable to drown you. So I didn't wear it. Instead, I pulled one of my defiant acts. I wasn't planning to live through this. I rode home, get the telegram to my sister, because I'm not going to make it. I drew a big Star of David on my back of my field jacket with an Eversharp pen. You're probably too young to know what an Eversharp pen was. It was a $3 pen that I got as a gift from my sister. And you fill it up in an inkwell. I painted a big Star of David on my back as a sign of defiance. I printed the Bronx, New York underneath it. And that's where Spielberg got Brooklyn on the T-shirt, on the field jacket in the picture. He took it from my history in the museum in New Orleans. Anyway, we decided to get across that beach. We had to go in about, we were dropped at least 150 yards too far out because it was low tide, 6:30. So when we hit the dry sand, we started to run across it. Now I landed on the right flank of Dog Green Sector, right on the border with Charlie Beach. The two tanks were here on my left. We ran past them. Now I saw 13 fellas holding on to the backs of the tanks. I could picture the 7 and 6 guys. One of them turned out to be the only guy that lived in my boat team. He got behind the tank. His name was Charlie Connor of Charleston, West Virginia. So he lived through the day without getting wounded. He was the only fellow that lived out of my boat team of 30. But I'm digressing. We ran on the right side of the tanks. I didn't want to hide behind the tank because I figured, you know, if you're going to hide in combat, it sort of made me feel like I'd be yellow. So I kept going in. Now, all of a sudden, we had a machine gun spray come from that bluff, the zigzag trenches, and it came from right to left. I heard a loud thud on my right side, and my rifle vibrated. Like, I don't know if you play baseball, you hit a ball sometimes, the bat vibrates. My gun vibrated. My M1, I turned it over. There was a clean hole through its receiver. The receiver is the part in front of the trigger. It's a little rectangular plaque. My 7 bullets in the magazine had saved my life. Another loud thud behind me on the left, and that soldier was gone. I hit the sand behind one of the hedgehogs. That's the most famous of the obstacles. They got them in the D-Day Museum. They use them in their advertisements. It's 3 iron rails welded together, cemented into the ground, and standing 5 foot high. Didn't offer much cover, but I hit the ground behind it, and I observed to my right, and Robert Ditmar of Fairfield, Connecticut, was lying on his back staring skyward, and he was yelling, I'm hit, Ma, Mother, silent. I looked over to my left, and the noise was horrendous on that beach. Sergeant Clarence Robeson of Lynchburg, Virginia, was staggering by me without his helmet, gaping hole in the left side of his forehead, his blonde hair streaked with blood, and I yelled for him to get down, but I'm sure he didn't hear me, and he was probably out of it. He staggered behind, all the way behind me to the left, knelt down facing the wall, took out his rosary beads, and started praying. And that machine gunner in the zigzag trenches cut him in half. But I mean really cut him in half. You probably never saw anything like that. We had 85% casualties in the first 5 minutes. 2 of us lived from my boat team of 30. I was wounded 3 times on June 6th, twice on June 7th. The Rangers from Saving Private Ryan came in on Charlie Beach with 2 boats, and one of them, they dropped these 105mm mortar shells in it. I saw the boat blow up. So they had 50% casualties immediately. And they went up the bluff and they knocked off that camouflaged pillbox. Now, should we go further?
Yeah, now you're
okay.
Down behind this hedgehog.
All right,
What do you do then?
I'm behind the hedgehog. The first thing I did is I took this rifle and I aimed at the little shine up on the zigzag trenches. And I got the man because there's no more machine gun fire from that. And I got sort of revenge for my buddies. But my rifle failed to eject. I got down on this knee and I put this foot. I was exposed. They could have bumped me off at any. My number wasn't up. I put my foot on the bolt of the M1 and I stepped down and the rifle cracked in 2 pieces. The ammunition was dented. The wooden sides of the rifle inside were shattered, and I threw the 2 pieces away in the 2 inches of water then, because the tide was coming in very rapidly. A soldier from Company A, Nicholas Kafkalis. I thought he was from Jersey, but I just looked at his stone in the cemetery. It said Pennsylvania, so I guess my memory wasn't that good. But anyway, he handed me back the 2 pieces of rifle, and I thought about this for maybe 10 years. And finally, I came up with the solution. Everything was so one-sided. He wanted to show me that he wanted me to keep fighting. So it was his last breath. He died. Right after that, I looked up at the pillbox on the right-hand side, and I never used foul language, and I cursed. And just then, an 88 millimeter shell went off in front of me and blew this cheek off. Took out my left upper jaw, the roof of my mouth. I had teeth and gums laying on my tongue. And that I had for all the way until June 11th. Couldn't spit them out, couldn't swallow them. But anyway, I decided it was time to get off the beach. So I crawled to the wall with all this machine gun fire going around on the sand around me, but they didn't hit me. I got to the wall, and there was a 29th, a Company A man named Dominic Suro of Georgia. Big 200-pounder, bigger than I was, and I was big. And he said to me in his southern drawl, "Stay here, I'm going to go get a medic." But I was in the range of that machine gun, so I grabbed the gun from one of the dead soldiers, and I followed him down the wall towards Vierville. And all of a sudden I heard clunk. A sniper got him right through the head. He got off the beach without a scratch, and that was all for him. Now, why not me? I was right in the same range, so my number wasn't up. I got to the seawall in front of where the National Guard monument is at Vierville, right next to D1. And there was my best buddy, Robert Garbett Jr., laying face down in the sand, probably hit by a sniper bullet. And there were 4 guys on the wall taking cover. The one on my right was Hal Weber of Springfield, Massachusetts. He had a severe face wound, and he was dying. One other thing I didn't mention, Bedford Hoback of Bedford, Virginia, got hit with the same shell that hit me here, but he got it this way, and he died. And next to him was a fellow named Elmere Wright of Company A, who had a St. Louis Brown pitching contract, and he was lying dead. I crawled right by them, so I forgot to mention that. But anyway, up on the wall then was Hal Weber dying. In front of me was Gilbert Pittenger of New Ringgold, Pennsylvania, Donald Zimzak on the left, Fred Kaufman of New York. There were 4 of us then that were going to hold off the whole German army if they came down the wall. Each of us was wounded. I stayed on the wall until, well, it was 8 o'clock in the morning. The tide moved out again, and Cecil Breeden came in from landing way to the east with a headquarters company, with the Company A headquarters landed there. There were 3 aid men. The other 2 were killed. He lived. He came down the beach, got over me, and started putting powder on my face, threw my cheek back over, and bandaged me up. That bandage stayed on me until the afternoon of June 7th. So he did a good job. I call him the greatest hero of D-Day. And the French are going to honor him this next year on June 4th to June 7th. They're going to call their encampment at Vierville Cecil Breeden Camp. And I contacted his 2 brothers to come to France. I'm digressing again. You'll let me get away with it. But anyway, about 10 o'clock, I looked out on the beach, and it was horrible. Dead bodies all over the place. But I saw one of my Company A sergeants, John Fraser, and his eyelids were moving. And a reflex action, I went out to get him. He was about 50 yards from the wall. Shells going all over. I didn't want him to get killed. So, unbeknownst to me, he told me later, in later years, this shoulder was shot, both legs were shattered. I didn't pay any attention. I grabbed a hold of this hand. I leaned over him with my ear, thought he was trying to tell me something, and a mortar shell went off, and I got 3 pieces of shrapnel through this side of the helmet. Had it hit this side, my head would have been blown off due to that blasting cap. So I got 3 holes in my helmet. Blood came down this way, and I put his arm over my shoulder, had this hand, my rifle, and I crawled with him to the wall. So you can imagine how strong I was. I had been wounded, blood was gushing out of my face. I was still strong enough to pick a 200-pounder, 6-foot something, and his picture is in my book. And his picture recently, so you can see how small I look now against him. But I put him in a safe place, and he's still alive today. He's about 85, 86. Anyway, 1 o'clock, 12 of us, that includes me, all wounded, decided to go up the bluff. The reason the wounded were fighting, they wanted to evacuate us. They said, run down the beach. We had the 104th Medical on the beach then. They had the red crosses on the helmet. If you ever see pictures of the beach. They said, run down the beach to St. Laurent-sur-Mer, and we'll evacuate you. You know, he looked at the face wound. These other guys, one fellow had a tourniquet around his arm. His 29th Division patch was half blown off. There was blood dripping from his hand, down his arm, and he had a gun in this hand. So these were the kind of wounded I was fighting with. One guy was a ranger. I didn't know any of their names, but he had a submachine gun, so I knew he wasn't one of us. So 12 of us went up the bluff. We went through the zigzag trenches. It was kind of quiet then. I saw the guy with his head blown off that I got from down below with my armor-piercing ammunition. And we went to the west of Vierville. We went around that way, and we encountered our first German defense in a farmhouse behind a wall. Now, there's a fellow doing a book now that has pictures of these places that I mentioned. He retraced my steps from the beach. One of the Germans made the mistake of sticking his head up, and it was like duck soup. I knocked him off. So we had 5 of them. The skirmish ended with a hand grenade thrown by one of our guys. So we left 5 dead Germans. Now, as we went along, we hit another machine gun nest near the beach road. I don't know if you're familiar with the beach road, but there were about 5 of them in there, and they were fighting fiercely against us, and our ranks were becoming depleted. By the time we finished knocking out that machine gun, there were only 7 of us left. Now, not all due to German fire. Some of them were just that seriously wounded that they died or fell down and got carried away. But anyway, we made it to the beach road. By now, the reason I'm familiar with all the times, my watch is in the museum, and it's waterproof, shockproof, and it was automatic. And it's still working in the glass case in the museum. All they have to do is shake it. So at 5 o'clock at that time, we were on the beach road, and we crossed over the road to a hedgerow because shells were coming in regularly. And I tripped a castrator mine. I don't know if you're familiar with a castrator mine. It's like having a pistol in the ground with 3 prongs sticking out of the ground. That was the trigger. If you stepped on it with your left foot, by the time you brought your right foot forward, a bullet went between your legs. So it was called a castrator mine. But I tripped it with my left foot. So I got a bullet between my first and third toe. And it came out on the dorsum of my right foot, my left foot. So I had a big hole in part of my leggings and through my shoe. So I got up against the hedgerow, took off my shoe, and I dumped the blood out like you would from a vase. Being a good soldier, I took my first aid kit, put powder in this hole that I can look through, and I put powder on it. I strapped a nice bandage on it, and I was all set. I was pulling my shoe back on. Shells started to come in. Pulled the shoe off, pulled the bandage off, pulled the shoe back up, strapped it, dove for cover. So 7 of us hid behind the hedgerow that night till about approximately 12 midnight. and a few of them were smoking. I didn't smoke. And all we heard was little explosions in the distance, maybe guys blowing foxholes, but we didn't see any other 29ers. And we were west of the beach on that road towards Maisie Grand Camp. We crossed the road a little after midnight. There was a machine gun guarding that road, a German machine gun, about 50 meters, right, controlling that road.